For those of you that are with us, or those that I guess pick up the recording after this is over, hello and thanks for joining. We're going to be talking today about physical pen testing tools, and we're actually going to talk about several different attack vectors. We're going to talk about when and where and how these attacks may happen. We're going to go over some of the conventional tools that are available and that we see used, but I also thought it might be fun to dive a little bit down the rabbit hole and talk about those non-conventional tools, things that like the non-pen testing attacker might use, like an actual bad guy may end up using in the field. So I thought it might be fun to cover some of that stuff today. And as we started talking about it a little bit, Meaghann and I came up with some pretty fun, pretty interesting content. So I think this should be an interesting conversation. I cannot for the life of me though change. There it is. I lost the slide deck. Okay. So who the heck am I? Why are you here listening to me today? Well, my name is Phil Grimes, and somehow I have found myself as the Director of Assessment Services here at Red Lake. So I run the team that handles all of our offensive services, pen testing, physical network assessments, pretty much all of the offensive stuff that Red Lake does falls under the purview of my team. I've been in the security world for, golly, it's actually 20 years this year professionally, ranging everything from, physical security. I've done asset protection over property and people. I've done digital security in pen testing and whatnot. I've done pretty much a little bit of everything in the entire security wheelhouse I've dipped my hands in over these last 2 decades. I've really been in I hate using the word scene, the culture, the community. That's even more dangerous these days. But anyway, I've been hacking computers since the mid 90s, and I've been hacking people and getting into places that I shouldn't be for even longer than that, the mid to late 80s. As a child of a single mother, I learned how to exploit people pretty early on, and I've got stories galore for all of that. But it's really turned into the fact that my career really embodies my personality and who I am. So that'll be a little bit about me. And also joining me today is Meaghann Lees, and I'll kind of let her introduce herself to you.
Thanks. So like you said, I'm Meaghann Lees. I'm a security consultant for Red Lake. I've been doing penetration testing for the last 3 years, but prior to that, I was a network security administrator. I also worked on an operations team, several help desks, mostly a lot of tech background. I've also been a librarian, and I have a degree in medieval Renaissance studies. So my background is widely varied. I, like Phil, probably started what we would call social engineering at a young age. And I've always been interested in physical security and getting around it. My dad and uncle sort of inspired that interest in me. My uncle was a private investigator and worked with my dad, who's a lawyer, and they would set up things so that they could catch people who were attempting to get into places. So surveillance and things like that. So I sort of learned things from a defender side. And that got me interested in being an attacker.
Very cool. Very cool indeed. So what are we talking about today, Meg?
I think we are talking about the interesting ways that you and I have seen and understood getting into places we aren't supposed to be.
Right on. Yeah. So we're going to talk today over a few different attack vectors, right? We're going to look at some under the door type attacks, some around the door type attacks. We're going to talk about tailgating. We're going to talk about social engineering. And what I'm hoping for today is that we'll talk a little bit about each of these attack vectors, how and where you see them, how they are attacked, and then we're going to go over some of the tools for each, right? Again, like I want to talk about those more professional grade tools, but we also are going to look into some of that more non-conventional stuff. Now, there's a ton of professional grade tools that are out there we can look at to help us in the field for some of these attacks. In fact, for those of you listening, or again, if you're picking this up on the recording after, I'd recommend you check out redteamtools.com if you're interested to see what's out there and available. And they give you a nice sampling of the professional level tools that are available. And this is just stuff you can purchase off the internet. Any random person can buy lockpicks, can buy key impressioning tools, can buy anything that we're talking about here today in the professional grade category. You can pretty much get this stuff through this site. But we're also going to look at those more non-conventional things as well. My keys aren't working. All right. Always going to be some type of technical difficulty here.
The risk of live
Here we
presentations.
go. All right. So the first attack vector I want to talk about is the under the door type attacks here. Okay, and these are tools that, as it sounds, they literally go under the door. A lot of times these are useful in using devices or manipulating a device that goes under the door to play with the door lever or the knob on the inside, the protected side of the door. We also can see attacks like this that go after like motion sensor type exits. Those, or you also see these push button exits, right? On the wall, you got the little push to get out, or maybe there's a motion sensor in the ceiling that sees the person as they approach the door, that bypasses that mechanism and lets you go out without hitting a latch release. And that's the first type of attack vector we're going to talk about, is these under the door attacks today. So I'll tell you one time that I actually had to use this type of attack. I was doing a test on an office building, and it's commonplace in office buildings to have both the lever style doorknobs and the motion sensor exits. And so I keep an under the door tool. Again, if you look at that redteamtools.com site, you can find this under the door tool that's available and get an idea of what we're talking about here. But I used an under the door tool to be able to bypass the lever style lock or knob on the inside of the door. Simply slide this thing under, it reaches up the protected side of the door and grabs a hold of that lever style knob and pulls it so that the knob basically opens, right? Normal operation of the lock, that it's not protected from that inside. So I've been able to use that under the door tool, but one unconventional way to do the same thing that I've had to do on the fly has been with a coat hanger, a little bit of tape, and some string, and you can really accomplish pretty much the same type of attack there. So Meg, have you ever seen any of these under the door type attacks in the field?
I think my experience comes more with the motion sensor stuff. The under the door tool specifically, or the coat hanger, that's kind of, I've always sort of considered that like a party trick that happens at conferences between nerdy people. But it is absolutely a valid tool for getting under the door like that. Are you on mute?
Yes, I am.
Uh-huh.
So another thing that I want to talk about here is more an unconventional type tool, and this is something that has made it into my arsenal for every physical engagement that I go on, because you never know, and it takes up so little room in the kit that it's great to have. But party balloons. And if you think about the balloons that like clowns use at kids' birthday parties to make balloon animals, right? The long, skinny hot dog looking things. This is what I'm talking about. Because specifically, if you're looking to target the motion sensor, I keep a couple of these balloons in my wallet. I keep a couple of them in coat pockets. I mean, they're just random that I may have a balloon on me because you never know when this may come up. But something that's great to do is you slip that sucker under the door and you blow it up from the outside, and then you let the thing go as it's inflated and it shoots under the door, and you know how the balloon's going to kind of as the air goes out, right? And that movement, that motion triggers the motion sensor and bypasses the mechanism to allow us in the door. So
Now, are you talking about an actual balloon or are you carrying a condom in your wallet?
no, I'm an actual balloon. These things are so. I mean, I suppose that may work, but this is an actual party balloon, and the reason that I advocate for something like this is it's cheap. I mean, you're going to get 50 of these balloons for $1, and you can get them almost anywhere. And again, that was something I really wanted to spin this talk toward today. Is sure we'll talk about those professional tools, but I want to think about how, the average attacker, somebody just walking off the street, might be able to attack something and succeed. And this is actually something that we try to build into the threat modeling process of our physical assessments when we do them. Is we want to understand, okay, if are you the proper target of an organized attacker, or might this just be a crime of opportunity where the bad guy's like, well, I see this weakness, so I'm going to go ahead and exploit it. And if you are on that lower risk register area, right, where you're not really talking about these more advanced attackers who are likely to have those pro grade tools, well, the average Joe off the street, if they realize that all it takes is a something to trip that motion sensor to be able to walk into a restricted area of the bank, then what's to stop them from just going and buying a pack of those balloons? So yeah, an actual party balloon is what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The one of the upsides, I guess, to carrying a condom in your wallet is nobody's ever going to wonder why you have one. They're not going to want to talk to you about it.
Yeah,
Um,
and to be fair, I do get looks pretty regularly. If I pull out a balloon, or another thing that I'm notorious for carrying around is these daggone, the colored, like little adhesive label dots. And I use those when I'm on a physical engagement, I will use those to mark where I've been. So I'll like just put a dot behind a door or on top of a cabinet or something just to be able to prove, hey, I was there and I touched this thing. And so I get that all the time. Like, why are you carrying these random things? I'm like, it's just, I guess, occupational hazard.
right, right. The stickers is a good thing because it is definitely an I was here kind of experience without causing too much feelings of violation.
Yeah, and also I've got the benefit of a close-up magic background, and I can, if somebody's really going to question me, I can make a couple of balloon animals and make you hear. Like, this is why I just keep them, because I'm a nerd. So. But that, yeah. So that's under the door type attacks. Again, this is stuff that goes literally under the door, and we're trying to attack the knob to actuate the latch to open the door, or take advantage of those motion sensors, something like that, to again release the latch and allow us in through that door.
Yeah, request to exit sensors are fantastic, whether they're temperature based or motion based. Um, Although it can be interesting trying to figure out which one it is if you don't have any prior knowledge. Because if you try the balloon trick and it doesn't do anything, then you know that it's a motion sensor, but you better like hope that you can go get your balloon back.
Yeah, well, or who cares? Like, the chances most of the time people don't necessarily know. I've actually, it's taken me 3 or 4 tries to get the balloon trick to work before,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because if they have that motion sensor dialed in, then you might have to find the sweet spot to be able to to actually trip the sensor. And so when I finally have gotten in, actually, there was one case where I did it like 4 or 5 times, and then I ended up tailgating my way in because I just had the opportunity.
Mhm.
And there's like half a dozen balloons on the other side, and people they just don't even pay attention to it. It's really weird.
Yeah, a lot of people just won't even look down. Um, I, when I was in college, speaking of being a big nerd, I used to be a LARPer, so live action role playing, and we would a group of us would get together at the OSU union, the student union, and right about 7 o'clock, the automatic locks would shut the outside doors, and we frequently forgot that fact and would be stuck with all of our stuff inside. Um, what we figured out, or what I figured out at one point, was that a very skinny stick stuck between the doors and waggled around for a second or two was sufficient for triggering the motion sensor. And so we would get back in. To my dismay, though, what I figured out later was I probably could have just pushed the handicap entry button, because those, unless you tell it specifically to lock when the rest of the door locks, some of them will go ahead and just open the door for you.
Let's see, what do we have here in the chat? Bill says, I used a small stack of paper slipped between two doors, tossed them upward through the space between the doors. It worked like a charm. That's brilliant, actually.
Mm-hmm,
So yeah,
mm-hmm,
taking advantage. Again, we're going to talk a little bit more here in a moment about attacking the gap in the door, but that's actually, you know, similar attack, different mechanism. So just again, a small stack of what, probably like 5 to 10 sheets of plain like printer paper that might be able to fit through the door, and chuck it up toward the ceiling so that when they scatter to the floor, hopefully it trips that mechanism. That's pretty smart one there, Bill. Thank you.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I'm sure we could easily talk about any one of these all day long, but in the sake of and interest of time, let's move on now and talk a little bit about lock mechanism attacks.
Ooh.
So where we were talking before about attacking the release, this time we're going to talk about actually attacking the locking mechanism itself. So the goal here being to bypass or defeat the lock. And the most common thought here is lockpicks. Everybody, when you think about the spies or, you know, physical pen testing or bad guys breaking into stuff, nearly the first thing that pops into your mind is going to be lockpicks. And that's a great a very effective tool. I mean, I learned how to pick locks in the early 90s. My mom actually married a master locksmith, and for my 12th birthday, I got an entire set of lock picks. Oops, big mistake. Who thought teaching a 12-year-old kid to pick locks was a bright idea? But again, it's something that I ended up turning into a career. So lockpicks are awesome, but
Mm-hmm,
they're very
mm-hmm,
conspicuous. There are other methods to bypassing the traditional lock, a little similar. I've seen it done, although depending on the strength or quality of the lock, using a paper clip isn't necessarily going to be the best way to go these days. It still will work on wafer locks for like filing cabinets or
mm-hmm,
some padlocks, things like that. But um, some other things that I think are really interesting or for the traditional lock bypass is a bump key. And bump keys or jiggle keys are really cool because they're really weak cut key blanks that once they go into the keyway, you pretty much literally you whack them with a hammer right on the back of the key as you're trying to twist the key, and it bumps or jiggles the key pins into proper position up past the shear line to allow you to turn the cylinder. Um, that's a really cool thing. I mean, bump keys are neat because they're not nearly as conspicuous as lock picks, although then you have to describe or explain to someone why you're carrying around a little rubber mallet. Another tool that I really like is the Proxmark for getting past like RFID type locking mechanisms. So any place where you have that badge or key fob that you're touching to the sensor to let you in, the Proxmark is another really good tool for that.
And that's a place where reconnaissance can really come in handy for projects that we've been hired on. Being able to tell sort of make and model of a badge sensor can sometimes lead to some interesting vulnerabilities. Some of them can be attacked with a fairly cheap RFID cloner tool. Some of them need, a little more oomph behind the Proxmark.
And so, it's not only the tool that you're going to be using, whether it's a high frequency or low frequency card matters, because that's going to tell you, what hardware you need to be able to clone the signal.
Yeah.
So there definitely are things that you need to take into consideration. However, it's a sad fact that most organizations that we see who implement RFID lock mechanisms do so at the very base of security. They don't do above and beyond any of the basics. Like, for example, one thing that I almost always recommend if I'm seeing the RFID locks in an environment is add a keypad and require a PIN. I know it's a pain in the rear to expect your users to tap their card and then enter a PIN, but talk about cutting the attacker's legs off. They have zero way, unless I hold the guy down and Chinese water torture the PIN out of him, the chances of me getting that PIN to be, or shoulder surf, whatever, I guess there's ways, but it's slim, right? It adds
Only
so
if they're
much.
using individual pins.
Yeah, well, that should be required. And again, if you're going
Yeah.
through the trouble of using a PIN, you might as well be smart about it.
Oh, but how many implementations actually do?
Well, how many
It's
of them
so
actually even
many of
use the
them.
PIN? So few that they'll even do it. I get it.
Right. And even if there is a keypad for most of these, they don't bother to change the default or the security default because they still need whoever their third party vendor is to be able to come on site and troubleshoot if they have issues with it.
Yeah, yeah. So I had mentioned, going back to the traditional locks here for a moment, I want to talk about a few more of the unconventional kind of tools.
I've used a
Would
bobby pin.
a bobby pin to pick a lock?
That was actually how I got started with it. Was when I was very, very little. I think I was probably about 7 years old. I saw an episode of G.I. Joe where Mary Jane pulls a bobby pin out of her hair and picks a lock and gets them
Again,
out.
totally doable depending on the quality of the lock that you're
Yeah,
attacking.
most of the attacks have been on like wafer locks. I used to do it to bother my dad at his office.
Yeah, yeah. I had mentioned in the term of like unconventional tools, I mentioned bump keys, but something else that is really an interesting attack vector against a traditional lock is key impressioning. And if anybody has had to hire a locksmith before, it's usually 50-50 in the school of thought between the locksmith as to whether or not they are pickers or impressionists. And it's usually one or the other because they're pretty high. It takes a fair amount of skill for either or both. And I'm a pretty moderate picker. I can impression a key, but it takes me a lot of effort, a lot of time, and usually at least two attempts before I'm successful. But impressioning a key essentially sticks a blank into the keyway, and then you are reverse engineering and reading the key blank that you stick in. You read that key and how the pins impact the blank so that you can reverse engineer how the pins are cut, and then you just kind of cut the pin. You cut the pinhole or the teeth in the key blank and basically cut your own key. It's a difficult discipline. It
It
takes a
sounds like a
long
pain in the
time.
butt.
Yeah, it really can be, but talk about a cool way. I mean, it's literally reverse engineering your way in through a key. One way that you can almost certainly get experience to this, if you have a vehicle that uses older non-electronic or non-digital lock ignition key of any sort, call a locksmith and tell them that you lost the key, and they will come and they can do this process right there in front of you, where they'll stick the thing in and they'll read how the key is impacted by the pins. They'll go and cut it. They'll stick it in. They'll do this a couple of times, and then in a few minutes you have a working key from just reading the pins. It's really interesting to watch.
Mm-hmm.
You think of any other traditional lock attack tools, or non-conventional attack tools against the traditional lock, Meg?
All of my non-traditional tools at this point really work better on things like wafer locks. Um, and there's always just, if I can bypass and not use a lockpick tool, I'm almost always going to do it, because lockpicking can take so long and can look so suspicious and leaves so many artifacts. That it's not something that I really attempt unless it's on like a cabinet door or something easy to pick like that. The thing that always worries me are those gun safes with the wafer locks on them, or cabinets that people just use as a gun safe. People not thinking about the extra layer of security that it's supposed to provide, or things like that.
That's a fascinating statement. And one thing that I want to remind anybody listening here is that a lock only keeps an honest person honest. If I am reduced to attacking the lock mechanism, that means that all my other avenues have failed.
Mm-hmm.
You're absolutely correct, Meg. The fact is that even a very proficient lock picker, it looks pretty conspicuous, borderline suspicious.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's a great thing, because while it certainly is feasible for somebody like very proficient lockpicker, I'm not going to go name dropping here, but any very proficient lockpicker to walk up to any random door, whip their picks out, and in a minute to two be able to bypass some pretty highly reputable complex locks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but it is pretty conspicuous. So if I can get around attacking the lock and just walk in the building by following someone, for example,
Mm-hmm.
why wouldn't I do that?
Or,
So
as in with the last example, if a balloon will work, there's no reason to get the
why
lock
pick
picks
it?
out. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, talked about Proxmark for the RFID thing. I just want to hit on a couple of the non-conventional or lesser known tools for the RFID type attacks. And there was a product that was released through Kickstarter some time ago called Keyzy, which is a very neat little key cloner, RFID key cloner, and it's meant to be like a little keychain tool. And so if you have, RFID access at your office, you can clone your fob with this thing at the push of a button. And I believe it'll actually clone up to like 4 different signals and allow you to replay those just by selecting a button on the device. That's a very cool thing. Something I haven't gotten to play with yet. They were sold out when they first came to market after the Kickstarter launch, but I plan to get one.
Mm-hmm.
Another really cool RFID type attack tool is the BLE key, BLE key. And this is a little bit more specific. This tool is actually a hardware tool that gets wired into the reader. So this is a pretty invasive tool. We actually have to crack the reader open and wire this thing to the inside of the reader. But it is a cloner and catalog reader for the Meaghann protocol. So this is a more secure protocol in the RFID world, the Meaghann protocol is, and the BLE key is a very neat tool. This is something that's considered pro grade, but it's fairly new to the market. It's not very widely used in the field, and it's just pretty neat to see that you get those kind of hardware type attacks seen in the movies all the time. We don't always see them implemented in the field. And with the BLE key, this is one where we actually see that onboard device get added. Downsides to that are that we have to end up coming back to retrieve the device to be able to make use of it. So again, we're weighing the threat model versus the efficacy, is that the word? Efficacy
Mm-hmm.
of the tool. And trying to work all of that in to meet the proper threat model.
one of the issues with that I can imagine is just having enough of a pretext, a social engineering pretext available to explain yourself if you happen to find that astute person who
Right.
notices that something's wired in.
Right. Yes. Foreshadowing in that comment right there, but we'll get
Uh-huh.
back to that. Yeah, so that's lock mechanism attacks. Again, these are tools that we're using to actually attack the lock itself. Yeah, the
Are we talking about magnetic locks yet?
yeah, so that's another one that was going to come up here is throwing a magnet. If you have the type of lock where it's literally just a big magnet connected to a big steel plate, and when you hit whatever the electronic release is, it interferes with that signal to release the lock, the latch. Um, a magnet is a fantastic use here to be able to, put that magnet up against the door and have it overcome the existing magnetic field, and then it would open up the door. Have you ever seen that used in the field, Meg?
I haven't personally seen anything like a rare earth magnet or anything used. The methods, I love a good maglock because actually I love a bad maglock because there's so many good ways to get past it. If it is particularly weak, like if you walk up and jiggle it a little bit and it seems like it might give, a good yank can sometimes just overpower it. You might not even have to bust out a magnet. And then, if you do happen to get the opportunity to tailgate or something like that and get inside, being able to leave the door open behind you, there's a lot of interesting options for that. The one way that I personally have overcome a maglock, at least I was, at least while I was on an engagement, it was while I was doing some more blue team work, but I was working with a consultant who was performing a physical test on the site. And what we did was a paper clip with scotch tape stuck to the magnet up at the top of the door. And what this does is it weakens the connection, but it doesn't weaken it to such a point that the security system wired into the door would notice. So the latch was always green, or it would remain red the entire time, and we were able to come and go without changing the signal to the door, just with a paper clip and some scotch tape.
Interesting. And as I'm looking through the deck here, I realize, even though I have magnets in our comments for this slide, that takes us on to really door latch attacks, because it's the latch here that is magnetic. Normally, when we're talking about door latches, we're thinking of like our door at home that has the little rounded tongue that sticks out, and when you turn the handle, it retracts into the door. Well, this mechanism is what secures the door, right? It's like flat on one side, preferably the side that you're opening against, and it is rounded on the other side to kind of slip into the latch itself. So when you're talking about latch attacks, the magnets definitely come into play. This is one place where, especially when you're talking about commercial or industrial, or it's not so much in office, but you do see some magnetic latches in offices. But it's very common in the environments that we do physical pen tests, and just carrying a magnet with you to overcome that lock makes it very easy. And I like the idea of keeping the door open for further use. We'll talk a bit more about that later, but it is definitely a great way to, or a great tactic for maintaining access once you've bypassed that lock.
In our case, it was a literal back door. So
Yeah. Okay.
it was fun.
Nice. So we're talking again now more about the door latch attacks, right? So not so much attacking the lock itself, but in attacking the latch. We talked about some of the magnetic type attacks, but some of the other latch attacks. This goes back to where Bill mentioned earlier in the chat about doors with excessive gaps that you can slip something through and maybe chuck it up at the motion sensor. Well, if I can see your latch, I can almost certainly slip that latch. I can almost certainly shim that latch and make the latch work without being able to use the knob. If you ever are curious about how this works, open a door in your house that has a lock, like the bathroom door, for example, and throw the lock, and you'll be able to see that the outside knob will not jiggle. It won't open. The lock is in effect, so it shouldn't open. Um, if you push on the latch, it will actually still retract into the door. So this is illustrating what I'm talking about for a door latch type attack. The fact that I can still push the latch into the door tells me that when the door is closed, if I can get something to contact that latch, it can still disengage the latch and open the door.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the things that some of the common type tools that you'll see, there are professional grade tools here, but off the shelf, out of pocket, impromptu stuff is so much more impressive. This is the kind of thing where in the movies you see a credit card comes out and people are slipping a latch. First of all, friends, you cannot slip a deadbolt with a credit card. I'm sorry to say.
No.
But a
You break
traditional
your credit card.
yeah, the traditional door latch, a credit card, this could be done with a bookmark. I've done it myself with dental floss and a dollar bill. There's a hundred different ways to get something behind that latch to be able to disengage the latch. What other tools have you seen out there, Meg?
Now, wait a minute. Before we go on to me, you need to tell that dental floss story.
The dental floss story. All right, so walked up and it was an internal door. I'd already gotten into the restricted area. Now I was just trying to see how long I could stay there and what else I could find. So every locked door that I came in contact with, I wanted to open. I came to this door, and when I walked upon the door, there was probably a half-inch gap in this door between the door and the jamb, and I could stick my pinky finger
Drive
in
a
the jamb.
bus.
Yeah, I could stick my pinky finger in the jamb and touch the door, the latch. So as I'm sitting here trying to figure out, well, what can I use to get in here? Um, I didn't have a whole heck of a lot with me because I really wasn't planning on this type of an attack. I wasn't going to use my credit card because it wasn't quite narrow, the depth of the gap. I couldn't get my card in behind the latch, if you follow me. So I'm thinking, well, what the heck do I have? Well, it happened to be my last day. I was heading to the airport at the end of this engagement. I had my bag outside, and I thought, well, I got some dental floss in there. Let's try it. So I took probably about 18 inches of dental floss, and I used my finger through that gap and got it behind. First of all, let me tell you, waxed dental floss will not work well for this. You want the non-waxed because that wax stuff gets sticky. Which I learned this the hard way because the waxed is all I use. So I'm sitting here I stuff this behind the latch using my finger because the latch is legit wide enough that I can stuff my finger in there a good bit, get clearance behind the latch, and I slip my 18 inches or so of dental floss down behind the latch. Now the problem is, how do you get the other end? How do you retrieve the other end of your dental floss? That's probably what you're wondering, right, Meg? Well, there's a couple of ways to do it. If I was at home, I would probably stick my face to the door jamb and inhale that dental floss, try to get the end of the dental floss in my mouth, but I don't want to
I
put
was hoping you weren't going to say that.
Hey, do what you do in the field, right? But I don't want to do that in public. I'm not going to do that at a customer site where, golly,
You don't want to have to
knows?
explain how you did it.
Yeah, well, not only that, but who knows what you're touching. But this is where having a can of compressed air can come into play. Or in this case, since I didn't have compressed air, I had to opt for a straw from a fast food joint. I stuck the straw inside the door jamb, up probably about an inch or two under the dental floss, right down below the dental floss, and then I blew hard so that the air was going behind the dental floss, and it blew the end out so I could just grab it.
Physics.
Yeah, physics. It was just a little bit of thought and a little bit of time. That's it. And then so once I had that other end, I have now both ends of the dental floss, so I can use that. I'm over here acting it out like y'all can see me on camera. I'm jimmying the latch, and pops the weasel. Uh-oh, you went quiet on us, Meg. I can hear you, but barely.
Uh-oh. I said the dollar bill makes more sense because you can just fold that and shim it.
Dollar bill. Yeah, I heard you. Did my volume go down or is it yours?
Mm-mm. I think it's me. Uh-oh. It's mine. Hang on.
All right. Yeah, a dollar bill is another one. So I actually made a bunch of YouTube videos a while back about all the stupid stuff I can do with a dollar bill, like opening a beer bottle and picking a lock. So it's not really picking the lock, but attacking the latch, and really the same kind of principle as with the dental floss. This is a little bit more difficult because it's not as uh, flexible as the dental floss was. But the advantage is if you know anything about origami with bills, which again, I'm a big nerd and used to make all kinds of stupid stuff as a kid. I have like 3 books on origami with a bill. And if you know anything about origami with bills, then you can think of ways to fold this up so that it will be rigid enough and flexible enough to give you what you need. So I folded a little J hook with a dollar bill. Imagine about half of the dollar bill to be straight and then the other half to be folded as the hook of the J. And with some origami folds to get that back behind the latch, it gives you just enough rigidity that you're able to pop a low security latch. Now, again, that's not going to work. These things aren't going to work on high security locks. But then again, high security facilities aren't going to have 1/2-inch gaps in the door jamb either. So think about the threat model as you go through.
Basically like a city rake made out of a dollar bill.
Golly, I can still barely hear you.
Oh no. I don't know what happened.
Hmm. Oh, more in the chat. What's the chat say?
Selena thinks it's on my side.
Yeah, okay. All right. So I'll keep talking. You can hear me, right? I guess.
We can hear you.
All right. So yeah, that is door latch attacks. So again, attacking the latch. Something that we aren't covering today, but I also want you to think about is there is the opposite side of the door. We're attacking, let's call it the right side of the door. Well, if you're looking then at the left side of that door, you have hinge attacks. And that's a whole other category where if you're leaving your hinges exposed to an attacker, you might as well not even lock the door. I mean, again, there are some controls that you can put in place to help against that. But if I can get to the hinges, I can pop those hinges off, and the latch and the lock that are attached to that door are completely useless at that point. So keep that in mind as well. What's the next one here? Tailgating. So Meg mentioned tailgating a little bit ago. If you're able to tailgate and get into, well, what does that exactly look like? So tailgating really attacks the social element here, and it's targeting the lack of awareness in our people. And in today's environment, that can be really kind of scary because we've got a lot of, we've seen a lot of bad things happen in the workplace. You know, it's a violent world that we live in. We never know when craziness things are going to happen. And tailgating is one of the biggest methods that I personally use in physical pen testing. A quick story here about my tailgating efforts. So I did a physical assessment one time for a customer, and it was brutal. Absolutely brutal. It was less than 15 minutes of work for long-term persistent access where we could prove significant financial loss. And this customer was really upset about that, to the point where after this assessment, they went out and spent about $750,000 completely revamping their physical controls on their headquarters. And so after it was about 6 or 8 months, they called back and they said, "Hey, we are so proud of what we've done here. We've done X, Y, Z. We've everything that we could possibly think of to revamp our security controls. We want you to come and give us your best shot." Famous last words. Um, So I did. We did. We sold them the engagement. We gave them a little bit of time, made sure all their controls are ready, and then they said, "Okay, you've got these 5 days to come and attack us." Well, after this huge investment, $750,000 invested in their physical controls, I drove my rental car to the parking lot about not even a quarter mile down the street. From the time I parked my rental car to the time I was standing in a restricted area, including the walk of that little less than a quarter mile to the facility there, it took me 7 minutes to reach the perimeter.
Ooh.
7 minutes. How did I do it, you ask? Was it something something like, did we hack the matrix with these? No, I walked right in the front door. The problem is they spent so much time, money, and effort trying to improve the controls with shiny lights and blinky boxes and things that go click, zip, whir, and boom, that they forgot to improve the security of the people who really are a substantial intrusion detection system.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a cultural problem. The fact that nobody thought to challenge someone that doesn't belong. We'll forget about the fact that they assigned badges to visitors. You had a visitor's badge if you were a visitor, which I had gotten. They gave me one in case I needed, but employees had no badging, no identification, no uniform. You're walking in off the street in plain clothes. So I looked like an employee just by showing up. So of course they're going to hold the door for me. I'm pretty friendly when I want to be. So this tailgating is something that is a very, very significant concern. Another quick battle story going on the opposite end here. Now, another successful tailgate. In fact, I had been maintaining access to this another completely separate client here, customer, but I was able to tailgate pretty consistently. In fact, I was able to tailgate for an entire week. I maintained an office in this building for a week of our engagement. And at the end, when we went and did the readout, the facilities manager who was in the readout with us had said that they had gotten several mentions of some big scary person following people around by random employees, but nobody said anything about it. Nobody did anything. Nobody challenged me, so it was like they have an alerting mechanism, but no kind of response to it. So tailgating is something that is very real. And, there's a lot of different ways we can do it. I've told a few of mine. How have you tailgated, Meg?
Can you hear me better?
Oh, much, yes.
Oh, good. Okay. I found the microphone volume button. Um, one of the more interesting tailgate stories that I have was not so much when when I've been an attacker, but it was as a defender. A company that I worked for, I was the network security administrator, but I was also their physical security administrator because we didn't have anyone else to do it. So I would get called when stuff would happen. And it turned out that there was a guy who was blending in, khakis and a polo shirt in a regular office environment. He had some sort of fake badge on his waist, and he was talking his way in past the receptionists, and he would pick different times of days, but he would tailgate in, and he would start to socially engineer the different receptionists, or he'd wait for when nobody was there at the desk. And it turns out that he was going to one of the floors that had a company that was renting space, and they had a lot of turnover for the company. So nobody really knew each other very well. It was difficult to figure out on site who was supposed to be there and who wasn't. It turned out that he was using an iPhone that he was setting just out of sight of the receptionist. It was like behind a potted plant at the front desk. And then he would go to the second floor bathroom and monitor. He would turn on a camera on the iPhone and monitor it remotely from another app. That instance was instrumental in a sort of an unpaid physical pen test, was instrumental in getting a whole big camera system and extra locks and things like that put on this site. But what they did do was the thing that you mentioned. They also increased a lot of the awareness that was going on with their people, and tailgating became extremely taboo for this office site.
Interesting. Yeah. And there's not really much in the way of professional tools for tailgating. This is something where like I'm carrying pizzas in on a Friday and my hands are full, or coffee and donuts on a
Coffee and
Monday
donuts.
morning. Yeah,
Yeah.
something where I'm trying to take advantage of people's good nature. My hands are full, so of course you're going to help me in, especially if I tell you you can have a donut, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So those are two very effective types of tools for tailgating, really.
mm-hmm. Just being friendly. So
Yeah,
many people are predisposed to helping somebody else out. I think everybody's heard the example of, you walk in with a resume or something that's got coffee dumped on it, and hand them a USB stick and say, "Oh my God, could you print this for me? I've got an interview upstairs in an hour."
totally. And we're borderline on this next topic here, and in the interest of time, I'm going to move us along. But we've mentioned in the tailgating of a couple of different pretexts, and that really falls into the category of social engineering.
Mm-hmm.
So where tailgating is an attack method, an attack that we may leverage during a social engineering attack. Um, Talking about social engineering in the context of physical pen testing, really, again, it still attacks that human component, right? It's focusing on the social element there. But this is where we're incorporating more of a pretext. This is where we have more of a coordinated type attack, where I'm dressing up as the phone guy is one of my favorites, or a construction worker. I can tell you the story when I dressed up as a municipal worker and came to it was a bank, and we told them there was a radon leak, and they were actually, everybody freaked out. Oh my gosh, I can actually smell the radon, it was so hard to maintain a straight face with
Oh
that, but hey,
no.
it worked and I got in. But using social engineering to um, lower the defense or suspicion of the defenders is really a method that allows us to use a lot of the other attacks that we've mentioned here today. We aren't typically going to, for example, I talked about that BLE key, the hardware solution for cloning or reading RFID signals. I'm not going to walk up to an RFID reader, crack it open, and start installing this hardware just dressed like some schmo, or wearing business casual clothes that I would if I was trying to get in, actually trying to be in the building. I'm probably going to be using a pretext that makes it look like I'm actually supposed to be there. That way, if people get sketched out, they're less likely to report me and less likely to confront me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think one of the key differences between tailgating and social engineering is tailgating actually sort of relies on a lack of awareness, or it hopes for a lack of awareness. And social engineering, almost by its definition, has to draw attention to itself in order to get the pretext planted.
Totally. Totally. One of my favorite things when we talk about pretext social engineering, if I find a place that has a third-party security company or janitorial or cleaning staff,
Mm-hmm.
man, dressing up like one of those folks. I love going thrift shopping and trying to find outfits for businesses that I can pretend that I'm somebody else, so I can walk into a place I'm not supposed to be. But a security guard or the janitorial or cleaning staff, talk about a blank check. You pretty much own the facility if you can get in with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And especially bringing up janitorial staff, if you can convince the other members of the janitorial staff that you are one of them and you're just a new hire, um, if they hand you a key, the janitors can get into almost any place. You don't
Totally.
even have to trip an alarm.
Totally. Yep. Awesome. All right, friends. Well, we've come to about the end. So to kind of summarize this stuff, I want to make the point that physical attack tools come in a plethora of forms. It can really be pretty much anything. One of my favorite things to do when I'm when I'm in a physical engagement is to use as little professional grade equipment as possible. How can I get this job done while using stuff that is readily available, easily obtainable by anyone at any time? And that was hopefully something that we left you with here today, that there are options, a lot of options out there in terms of how an attacker might go after your physical locations. The thing is, the intent is what determines the purpose of that object. So, when we're out there looking at things like lockpicks, is it a tool or is it a weapon? This is a conversation that I have pretty much every time I fly, because I keep my lockpicks in my backpack with me when I'm going through TSA, and they absolutely hate it.
They hate it.
What are you doing with it? Well, it's my job. I'm a security consultant. This is what I do. It's not illegal and it's not a weapon. I'm using it for a good purpose. But give that very same tool to someone with malicious intent, and now it becomes a weapon. And we have to remember, in today's world, even though it's becoming more and more difficult now in this, I don't even want to call it post-COVID world, because of so much working at home, so much distributed work happens, but physical controls really are just as important as your digital controls. Awareness is just as important as the access control restrictions set up by your firewall, making sure that your people are paying attention to things that don't belong, making sure that they're saying something, making sure that we're doing something if we're encouraging our people to say something. We've got to
them feel empowered.
Totally got to react.
It's a huge thing to, it's one thing to teach people to be aware, but like you were touching on earlier, being able to make them feel in control and empowered to say something, whether it's to an attacker or to a security person to get their attention. That is an enormous part of employee training.
It really is. And this is something that is just like your technical security program. It requires ongoing work. You have to be testing the people. You have to be educating them after the test and continually growing that program so that they are aware, and encourage them to, see something, say something, kind of thing. So with that, we have about 3 minutes till the time is over. So I want to open it up here. We did it. We came in under. I was afraid we were going to go over. I kind of rushed that last little bit, but kind of open the floor. Questions, comments, anything you guys want to talk about in terms of physical security or the tools that you might see being used, either, I don't know, the commercial type stuff, the professional grade, or that more industrial crime of opportunity. Questions, comments at all? We're open.
My favorite example of shimming was when a security consultant did that to my CIO using his own business card.
Oh, neat. Yeah.
Moises is asking, how often should a physical assessment be done?
Good question. So similar to my recommendations for technical assessments, I believe this needs to be kind of a layered approach. We have either, we really recommend doing an annual pen test, right? So annually having somebody really try to break in. But then you should also really layer that with additional testing. So I would recommend probably like quarterly vulnerability assessments physically. And that can be something as simple as a security walkthrough, having somebody come on site and just observe for the day and review the threat, the attack surfaces, that they observe. But that's really my recommendation. And Meg, I'd be interested if you have any other feedback, but I would say quarterly vuln assessments layered with annual penetration tests.
I would agree with that. When I was a defender, that was pretty much how we operated, although I would say in several of the companies and corporations that I've been a part of, the quarterly stuff can be a little frustrating, and only because progress can be so slow sometimes. And those physical assessments are crucial to scaring the pants off of people enough that they take those quarterly vuln assessments seriously.
Yep. Yep. I don't even know how this thing works. How did you mark that as answered?
It gave me the option of done.
Neat. All right. So these fancy Zooms here.
Anybody else? We're right about at time. Alexander is asking, ever pose as a security tester and then give away gift cards to people who caught you out of getting busted?
No, but that is fabulous. And don't think that I'm not going to steal it, Alexander. Thank you.
You may be stealing it, but I've done it.
That's awesome. That's
I've done
brilliant.
it. When I was network security, we frequently would use positive incentive, positive motivation in order to get buy-in from employees to care, both during phishing tests and then during live physical security assessments as well. Gift cards was the easiest way because most corporations can kind of write that off with a tax thing. And so we would just get a stack of them. And then sometimes it was, like an IOU to turn in for swag from the company or something that usually didn't go over as well.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, people enjoy gift cards.
Man, that is brilliant.
It's a really good motivator too. People get excited.
Yeah, thank you. Wonderful. Well, we're about 2 minutes after. I appreciate everybody. If you want to throw any other questions out here, we'll stick around for a few more minutes. Otherwise, that's been our time. So I really appreciate everyone who took the time to be with us today and talk about physical security and the tools that we get to play with in that arena. I hope it's been a little educational, maybe a lot entertaining. Otherwise, thanks so much for just stopping and spending your afternoon with us.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks a lot, guys.
All right. I think we can stop the share.